Hi, Terry Rowland of T Rose Studios. Today I'm going to share how I make my binding boards. Now, the binding boards are just a tool to help me fold my binding in half, which is a tedious job, and sometimes you burn your fingers. So this is a quick way to make my binding. So I'm going to walk you through how I make them. First thing I need to do is have a 6-inch by 12-inch piece of wood paneling. I like wood paneling because it is thin, it's lightweight, it's not really heavy, and you can get it totally wood. Now, you can get paneling that is pressed board. I would steer away from that. I like a wood product. It's just doesn't have glue in it, and glue might start on fire. So I use a paneling that is wood paneling, 6-inch by 12-inch. I also need some batting. Now this is just a leftover piece of 80/20. If you're concerned, you could do 100% cotton. The batting that I've put in my boards that I've made are 80/20. And I'm going to lay it on top of my paneling, and I'm going to just pull it up like that. I'm not going to sew it because we're going to be putting it in our sleeve, our 100% cotton canvas sleeve. Any heavier weight cotton fabric will work for this. I would steer away from dark colors because sometimes people will be spritzing their their binding, and when they spritz it, they may get the cover wet and it may transfer ink. So I steer away from dark colored covers and just use a canvas. So that's ready. I'm going to get my outside layer ready to sew. Now I've taken my, let me get my right measurement here, a 7-inch by 28-inch piece of canvas, and I've turned under the edges 1 inch, and I've given it a good press on both ends. So I pre-did that for us. I'm going to put it right side together so that folded edge will be outside, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam right along both sides, and I'm going to back stitch that top and back stitch again. Cut my thread and do the same thing on the other side, back stitching on both ends. Now I'm going to turn this right side out. I'm going to actually just clip that corner off just to reduce the bulk there. Poke out my corners. Now that these corners are all poked out, I'm just going to set this aside, and we're going to make our little handle. So I'm taking a 2-inch by 7-inch piece of the same canvas and fold it in half lengthwise. Give it a press just so I can find the center, and I'm going to fold both sides in and give it a good press. And again, press it so all of the raw edges are in the middle now. And I'm just going to top stitch on both sides, and this will be our little handle. So I'm going to top stitch fairly close to the edge. So now my handle's all ready, and we're going to insert our board with the batting wrapped around it. You could sew this on. I don't find it's necessary. I'm going to just slide that in, and it'll fit fairly snug, but I want it to be fairly snug. And I'm going to push this all the way in to the end, just like inserting a pillow into a pillowcase. As I say, it's fairly snug. Try and center this however you want your handle to be. I usually go in about 1 inch. I'll pin that. Get it so that I can do that properly. About the same distance away on this side, and pin that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a line of stitching along here. If you want to back stitch there, that would be fine. That would just give it a little more security. All the way here, back stitch, over. And then I'm going to come over as close as I can to the actual board and run my presser foot right alongside that and just give it another row of stitching there just to finish it off. So I'm just top stitching. I want a little bit of a back stitch. Come on, there. I'm just going to take that pin out because this is really thick. Oh. Top stitching all along here. Back stitch right where that handle went through. Again, I'm taking that pin out. Back stitch. I'm going to leave the needle down and I'm going to sew. And I'm going to come around and I'm just going to do my row of stitching right here. Now, I've got my needle set way over here. I'm going to change my needle position so it's closest to this side of my presser foot. There. I'm going to back stitch. And my presser foot is running right alongside that board on the inside. And my binding board is done. The handle's good and secure. The board isn't floating around inside that sleeve because it was fairly tight. And we're ready to actually take our needles and add them to our board.
What kind of needles?
Now these are a 5-inch dull needle. You can pick it up at a lot of specialty sewing stores will carry dull needles. So they're a super thin needle that they use for attaching arms on like the teddy bears. If you're making any type of doll, they need these long needles to go through the bodies so that you can attach arms and stuff like that. So we need to set up our needles. So to figure out how to set up our needles, I've taken the binding and I folded it in half. I want the path where the binding is going to go through to be the exact width of this area right here. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it in, and I want to make sure I poke it in right on the other side of that fold. Good. So you can see it still slides through, but there's no give in there. Now, how far apart will I put my needles? That's important. So depending on what iron you're using, I like to have it the same width as my iron. So I would need to set this one in right about there. So again, I'm going to come in here. I'm coming up on this side of that, and I'm going to go down just on the other side of the fold. Again, nice and tight. And my iron will fit in between there, and when I'm pulling, my iron gets caught on that needle. If you're using a big iron, these needles would be just farther apart. For this demo, I've got my little iron here. All right, things that are important to know. When you're pulling your binding through, you want to make sure that you're coming straight in and straight out. I guess straight in and straight out. If you're kitty wonker, you can see how it's going to distort your binding ever so slightly. And that can distort coming in, or it can distort coming out. So pulling straight through, you're going to have no distortion, and you're going to get a really nice fold on your binding. Now, when I'm doing a long piece of binding, like a king size, I just take all of my sewn binding and I throw it off the end of my ironing board or off the end of the table. That helps it to come up and get untangled, let's say, so that it's pulling through nicely. Now, there's one other thing that I like to do is I like to have my fingers in between the binding so that I can roll it to get them matched up. Now, I like my opening on this side. So I'm going to flip this over so that the opening is on that side. I'm going to feed it back through so that I can hold onto my binding like this. I'm going to have this fairly close to me so that I can be over top of it, and I can be watching to make sure that my binding is lined up. Once I get all set up, everything's lined up the way I want it, that's when I'm going to pick up my iron and set it on top of my board. And I'm going to just watch and pull, lining up the edges as it's going. And I don't pick up my iron, I just leave it there. And I'll just keep going until I actually get all of my binding pressed in half. Now, that is one reason I like my binding board. Is I don't care if I overheat this and may get a burn mark on here. That doesn't bother me. That would bother me if it was on my ironing board cover. So that's why I love my little binding board. I can take it with me to retreats, and I can let all of my friends use my binding board. They're going to want to find this video so that they can make their own. I hope this little tip and tool will help you in your quilting journey.